My father smiled at me across a table full of lobster tails and wagyu steaks and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first month's rent. And he said, "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." 16 members of my family were seated around that table. Every one of them looked at me. Welcome to Her Untold Nights. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the bell. Because what I did in the next 10 seconds is something I still think about, and I think you're going to want to hear all of it. I looked back at my father for a long moment. Then I looked at the table, the lobster, the wine, the wagyu, the appetizers that were already half finished, the dessert menus that someone had apparently already requested, because they were sitting at 3-place settings like small, hopeful flags. I had been in the restaurant industry for 15 years. I had managed dining rooms, trained servers, negotiated with vendors, handled the kind of situations that end careers if you don't handle them correctly. I had seen every way a restaurant evening could go wrong. I had never seen anything quite like this. I set my purse on the empty chair beside me. I picked up the menu I hadn't ordered from. I looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. Then I set it down. I caught the eye of our waiter, a young man named Derek, who had the specific alert stillness of someone who understood that something was happening at this table and was not sure what. I raised one finger. He came over immediately. I leaned in and I said 2 sentences to him, very quietly. What happened next is the end of this story. But to understand it, you need to know everything that came before. Because what my family did that night didn't start in that restaurant. It started 3 years earlier in a phone call I almost didn't answer. My name is Cassie Merritt, and this is the most expensive dinner my family never paid for. I started in restaurants at 19, bussing tables at an Italian place in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, to pay for community college. I fell in love with it immediately. Not just the work, the whole ecosystem. The way a good dining room operated like a living thing, breathing and adjusting and responding in real time. The way a great front of house manager could smooth over a kitchen disaster so seamlessly that the guests never knew. The way the right lighting and the right music and the right temperature in a room could make a person feel before they had taken a single bite that they were somewhere worth being. I worked my way up, busser to server to floor manager to assistant general manager. I moved to Chicago at 24 to work at a restaurant group that was doing interesting things, and I stayed in that city for 11 years, building a career that was genuinely mine, something I had constructed from the ground up with no help and no inheritance and no safety net beyond my own ability to show up and do the work. By 34, I was the general manager of a mid-upscale restaurant in the River North neighborhood. 120 covers a night, a wine list I had curated myself, a team of 40 that I was proud of. It was not a glamorous job in the way people imagine restaurant management to be glamorous. It was long hours and difficult personalities and constant problem solving and a level of emotional labor that most people outside the industry don't fully understand. I loved it completely. My family, my parents, Gerald and Pat Merritt, and my 2 brothers, Kevin and Shane, had never quite understood what I did or why I did it. They were not restaurant people. My father had worked in insurance for 30 years. My mother had managed a dental office. Kevin was in logistics. Shane was a high school history teacher. They were solid, practical, Midwestern people who respected work they could easily describe to other people, and restaurant manager never quite fit into that category the way accountant or engineer would have. What they did understand was money, specifically my money, and the various ways it could be useful to them. It had started small, the way these things always do. A loan to Kevin when his car needed a transmission. I'll pay you back, Cass, I swear. A contribution to Shane's wedding costs because the budget was tight and they wanted it to be nice. My parents' anniversary trip because they had never had a real vacation and it seemed like a kind thing to do. None of it came back. I want to be clear about that. Every dollar I gave my family was a dollar I never saw again. And at some point, it stopped being called loans and started being called just what Cassie does. Cassie has money. Cassie is generous. Cassie will help. I helped for years. Not because I didn't notice I noticed everything. I'm a restaurant manager. It's the job. But because I told myself that family was worth the cost and that the cost was manageable and that the discomfort of saying no was worse than the discomfort of saying yes. The breaking point came at my parents' 60th birthday dinner. My mother and father are 11 months apart, and they had always celebrated together. I had organized it, reserved a private room at a restaurant I knew well, handled the catering deposit, arranged the cake. The evening was lovely. At the end of it, as we were settling up, my father handed me the bill. Not half of it, not a portion. The whole thing. He said, "You're the one with the restaurant connections. You probably got a deal." I had not gotten a deal. The bill was $1,800. I paid it. I drove home. I sat in my apartment and I thought about the $1,100 I had put toward Kevin's wedding gift the previous year and the $800 I had lent Shane for a home repair he had never repaid, and the anniversary trip that had cost me $1,400 and the car transmission that had cost me $900. I added it up for the first time. The number was significant. The next morning, I called my mother and I said, as calmly as I could, that I felt like the financial dynamic in our family had become unbalanced and that I needed things to change. I said I was happy to be generous when I chose to be, but that I couldn't continue to be treated as the family's default funding source. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said I was being selfish and that family supported each other and that I had always had more than everyone else, and that my attitude was hurtful. My father called an hour later and said largely the same things with more volume. Kevin sent a text that said, "Wow, Cass, didn't realize you were keeping score." Shane didn't call at all. I stopped calling them. They stopped calling me. 3 years passed. I won't tell you those 3 years were easy. They weren't, but they were mine. And I built things in them that were solid and real and entirely funded by my own labor. Then, 14 months ago, my phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. I sat there for 3 rings, looking at her name, thinking about who I had been the last time we had spoken and who I was now, and whether those 2 people were ready to be in the same conversation. I answered on the 4th ring. My mother said, "Cassie, I've missed you. We all have." I was hoping we could start over, maybe have dinner, just the family, something quiet to reconnect. I said, "Mom, I'd like that. But I need us to be clear that I'm not in a position to host or fund anything. If we're having dinner, I'm happy to pay for myself, and that's it." She said, "Of course, honey, this is about reconnecting. Nothing else." I believed her. That was my mistake. Not the only one I made, but the first. The restaurant my mother had chosen was called Meridian. I knew Meridian. Everyone in the Chicago restaurant industry knew Meridian. It was one of those places that existed at the intersection of old money and new ambition white tablecloths. A sommelier who had worked in France, a menu that changed seasonally and never included a price point below $32 per entree. I had eaten there twice in 11 years, both times for special occasions. both times with a clear understanding of what the evening would cost before I sat down. My mother had described the dinner as small and quiet, a family reconnection, just us. I arrived at 7:15, 5 minutes early, the way I always am, because 15 years of restaurant management had made punctuality a reflex. I gave my name to the host, a young woman in a black blazer, who checked her screen and said, "Of course, miss. Merritt, your party is already seated. Right this way." I followed her through the main dining room, past the bar, through a set of frosted glass doors into the private dining area. And I stopped. There were 16 people at that table. Not 6, not 8. 16, my parents, both brothers, Kevin's wife and their 3 kids, Shane's girlfriend, my mother's sister and her husband, 2 cousins I had not seen in years, my father's brother, and 2 people I genuinely did not recognize and had to be introduced to, later friends of my father's apparently, who had been extended an invitation I had known nothing about. The table was full. The bread baskets were already empty. The bottle of wine, I clocked it immediately. It was a 2019 Caymus Cabernet that retailed at the restaurant for $412, was more than halfway gone. The appetizer plates were being cleared as I stood there. Lobster bisque, shrimp cocktail, a charcuterie presentation that I estimated at $60. I stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I ran the numbers the way I always run numbers, automatically, professionally, without being able to stop myself. 16 covers, upscale menu, wine already open, appetizers done. If every person at that table ordered an entree and dessert, and the dessert menus were already on the table, which told me everything the bill was going to be somewhere between $3,000 and $4,500 before gratuity. My mother saw me and smiled the way you smile when you've done something you know is wrong and you're hoping the smile will cover it. She waved me over to the empty chair at the head of the table, beside my father. I walked to the chair. I sat down. I put my purse on the seat beside me. My father said, "Cassie, you made it. We've been waiting." I said, "I see that." He said, "We ordered wine. Hope that's okay. The sommelier recommended it." I said, "I see that too." There was a brief beat, just a fraction of a second, where my father's expression flickered. He had expected, I think, either confrontation or compliance, and I was giving him neither. I was giving him nothing, which is a thing you learn to do in 15 years of managing difficult situations. When you don't know yet exactly what you're going to do, you give nothing away. The waiter, Derek, appeared at my elbow. He was perhaps 26, composed with the alert quality of someone well-trained. He asked if I'd like to hear the specials. I said, "Please," he described the specials. Lobster tail with drawn butter and asparagus, market price. I knew from the menu board I'd passed that market price tonight was $89. Wagyu beef tenderloin with truffle reduction, $112. A whole roasted branzino for 2, $160. Around the table, I watched my family receive this information with the enthusiasm of people who had already decided they were not paying. Kevin ordered the wagyu. His wife ordered the lobster. Shane ordered the wagyu. My father ordered the lobster. My mother ordered the branzino for herself, alone, not for 2. My aunt and uncle both ordered lobster. The cousins ordered steaks. The friends of my father's, whose names I still didn't know, ordered lobster and wagyu respectively. I ordered a glass of sparkling water. My mother said, "Aren't you going to eat, honey?" I said, "I'm not hungry yet. I'll decide in a bit." She accepted this. The table moved on, conversations overlapping, wine being poured, the particular warmth of a group of people who are having a very good time at someone else's expense. I sat at the head of it and listened and watched and ran the numbers and waited. The mains arrived 40 minutes later. The table looked extraordinary, I will give it that. 15 years of restaurant work had not made me immune to a beautifully plated lobster tail. The smell was wonderful. The presentation was exactly what Meridian did well. I had still not ordered. Derek came to check on me. I told him I was fine. He gave me the specific look of a trained server who understood something unusual was happening and had decided his job was to support me through it, whatever it was. I appreciated that look. I gave him a small nod. It was when the dessert menus were distributed, the dessert menus that someone had apparently requested before I arrived, which meant this moment had been planned, that my father leaned back in his chair. The particular lean of a man who is about to say something he has been waiting all evening to say. And he looked at me with a smile that I recognized from my childhood as his closing the deal smile, and he said, "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." 16 people looked at me. The table went just slightly quieter, not fully quiet. Conversations continued at the edges, but the people closest to me caught the moment and held it. I looked at my father. I looked at the table. I thought about the 3 years of silence. I thought about the phone call and the word reconciliation and the promise of something small and quiet. I thought about the Camus Cabernet and the lobster tails and the wagyu and the branzino my mother had ordered for herself, alone, the one that served two. I thought about 15 years of managing dining rooms. I said very pleasantly, "Give me just one moment, Dad." I caught Derek's eye. I raised one finger. He was at my elbow in 4 seconds. I leaned in and I said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "I need you to separate my check. Sparkling water only. And I need you to bring the rest of the table's bill to my father at the head of the table when it's ready." Derek looked at me for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Of course, Miss Merritt, I'll take care of that." He stepped back. He disappeared toward the service station. My father was still smiling. He said, "So what do you say, Cass? For old time's sake?" I said, "Dad, I'm going to let Derek sort out the bill when it comes. I think you'll find it's all been taken care of." He looked satisfied. He picked up his wine glass. He turned to say something to the friend on his left, whose name I still didn't know. I sat quietly and waited. The bill came 40 minutes later during the dessert course that I had also not ordered. Derek placed it as instructed in front of my father. My father picked it up with the confidence of a man who expected to find it paid. He looked at it for a long moment. The number at the bottom before gratuity was $4,182. My check, Derek had separated it as requested and placed it quietly beside my water glass, was $14.50. My father looked up from the bill. He looked at me. I looked back at him with the expression I had used 10,000 times across 15 years of restaurant management: pleasant, attentive, completely unreadable. He said, "Cassie, what is this?" I said, "That's the bill, Dad." He said, "I thought you were paying." I said, "I paid for my water. It's right there." I indicated my check. The table had gone quiet now, fully quiet. The kind that happens when 16 people simultaneously realize that the social contract of an evening has just been rewritten. My mother was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before, not anger, not guilt exactly, but something between them. Kevin had put down his dessert fork. Shane had his phone in his hand but wasn't looking at it. My father said, his voice lower now, "We can't pay this." I said, "I understand. You'll want to speak with the manager then, or Derek can break it down by seat if that's easier for the table." My father's voice went tight. He said, "Cassie, this isn't funny." I said, "I'm not trying to be funny, Dad. I'm trying to be clear. You asked me to come to a reconciliation dinner. You told me it would be small and quiet. I arrived to find 16 people and a $400 bottle of wine already open. When I sat down, you told me I was paying because I owed it to you. I don't owe you this dinner. I don't owe you any dinner. What I owe you is the same thing you owe me: basic honesty and basic respect. I paid for my water. That's my contribution tonight." The silence was very complete. My mother said quietly, "Cassie," I said, "Mom, I drove 2 hours to be here because I wanted to believe this was real. I wanted to believe we were starting over. I know now that we're not. And I think somewhere, some part of you knows that too." Kevin said, his voice defensive, "You can afford it, Cass. This is ridiculous." I turned to look at my brother. I said, "Kevin, whether I can afford something has never been a reason to expect me to pay for it. That's not how respect works." He looked away. Derek appeared at my father's elbow, professional, calm, entirely unsurprised. He said, "Sir, I can absolutely break the bill down by seat if that would be helpful. It will take me about 5 minutes." My father looked at Derek. He looked at the bill. He looked at me. I picked up my purse. I took out my wallet. I placed $30 on the table, 20 for my water, and a tip for Derek that was more than his service of me had cost, because Derek had been excellent and Derek had done his job and Derek deserved to be tipped properly. Then I stood up. My mother said, "You're leaving?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Cassie, please don't do this." I said, "Mom, I love you. I mean that. But I came here tonight hoping for something real, and I found a setup. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending that this is something it isn't. When you want to have a real conversation, just you and me, no bill, no audience, I'm here for that. I genuinely am." I looked around the table. 16 faces. Some of them embarrassed, some of them angry. The 2 friends of my father's whose names I still didn't know looked profoundly uncomfortable, which I felt sorry about because they were the most innocent people at the table. I said, "Enjoy your dessert," and I walked out. I walked through the frosted glass doors, through the main dining room, past the bar, through the entrance, out onto the street. The night air was cold and clean, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it. Then I walked to my car. I sat in it for a minute. I thought about my father's face when he looked at that bill. I thought about Derek, who had executed my 2-sentence instruction with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was needed. I thought about the $30 I had left on the table and whether it was enough. It was enough. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table and I called my best friend Renata, who had been in the restaurant industry even longer than I had and who listened to the whole story and then laughed for approximately 45 seconds straight. She said, "You ordered water." I said, "Sparkling?" She said, "Cassie, you are my hero." I said, "I just paid for what I ordered." She said, "That's what makes it perfect." My phone rang 6 times that night. My father twice, my mother twice, Kevin once, Shane once. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to each message in the morning once with my tea. My father's first message was angry. His second was quieter, the voice of a man who had spent a portion of the night thinking. My mother's messages were apologetic in tone, but still managed to frame the evening as something that had happened to her rather than something she had organized. Kevin's message was defensive. Shane's was the shortest 3 sentences ending with, "I think we owe you an apology, Cass. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." I saved Shane's message. I deleted the others. Then I made a decision about what came next. The bill, I found out later from Shane, was paid by my father and Kevin together. It cleaned out my father's checking account and required Kevin to move money from savings. The friends of my father's, the two men whose names I had never learned, quietly contributed a portion as well, apparently embarrassed enough by the situation to want to share the cost. My mother's sister paid for herself and her husband. The cousins apparently had a complicated conversation in the parking lot that I was told about secondhand and will not detail here except to say that it did not go smoothly. The Camus Cabernet, I was also told, had not tasted as good on the way out as it had on the way in. I did not feel triumphant about any of this. I want to be honest about that. When I imagined in the abstract a moment like this, a moment where my family's assumption that I would simply pay for whatever they chose to take, I had imagined feeling something sharp and satisfying. What I actually felt was tired and a little sad. And underneath both of those things, very still. There is a difference between a boundary that wins and a boundary that simply holds. What I had done at Meridian was hold a boundary. I had not won anything. Exactly, my family had not been transformed. The dynamic had not been corrected. What had happened was simpler and more honest. I had paid for what I ordered, and I had left. That was all. It was enough. Shane called me 3 days after the dinner. Not a voicemail, he called, and I answered because I had saved his message. Because 3 sentences of genuine accountability from a person who had been silent for 3 years meant something to me. We talked for an hour. It was uncomfortable and careful and real in the way that conversations are when 2 people are trying to build something honest out of something that had been dishonest for a long time. He said, I knew what the dinner was. I should have called you beforehand and told you. I didn't because I didn't want the conflict. And that was cowardly. I said, yes, it was. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. I believe you. We have had dinner 3 times since then. Just the 2 of us at a normal restaurant, splitting the bill the way 2 people who respect each other split a bill. It is not the sibling relationship I would have designed if I could have designed it. But it is real. And real, as I have said before, is better than performed. My parents called twice in the month following the dinner. I did not answer. I was not ready. There was nothing I wanted to say to them that I had not already said at Meridian, and I needed them to sit with what had happened without my presence, making it easier. 6 weeks after the dinner, my mother sent a card. It was a plain card, no fancy paper, no monogram, the kind you buy in a drugstore. Inside, she had written, I know we set you up. I want you to know I knew it was wrong before you arrived, and I did it anyway. I don't have an excuse for that. I just wanted to tell you I know. It was not a complete apology. It did not address the 3 years of silence or the patterns that had preceded them, but it was an acknowledgement of a specific wrong, clearly stated without justification. That was more than I had expected. I wrote back. A short letter, 3 paragraphs. I said I had received her card and that I was glad she had sent it. I said I was not ready to resume a regular relationship, but that I was open to the possibility of one someday, if we could build it differently than we had built the old one. I said the building would require honesty on both sides and that I was willing to try if she was. I said I loved her. I meant it. She wrote back. We have been writing letters, slow, careful, imperfect letters for the past year. My father has not written. That is a choice he is making, and I have accepted it. Kevin and I have not spoken. His voicemail from that night revealed something about how he sees me as someone with a resource he is entitled to access that I have not found a way past. Maybe someday. Not yet. Derek, my waiter, received a card from me 3 days after the dinner. I tracked down the restaurant's general email and asked them to pass it along. I thanked him for his professionalism and his read of the situation, and I noted accurately that his service had been impeccable. I also included a gift card to a restaurant supply store that I happened to know he would use. Because I had asked him during one of our brief exchanges that evening if he was considering culinary school, and he had said yes. He sent me an email back that was 3 lines long and entirely genuine. He said he had figured out what was happening at the table early in the evening and had decided his job was to support me through it in whatever way I needed. He said the 2 sentences I had whispered to him were the clearest instructions he had received in 2 years of serving. I told him he was going to be very good at whatever he decided to do next. I am still the general manager of my restaurant. I go in 5 days a week. I oversee a dining room of 120 covers, a team I am proud of, a wine list I curated myself. It is not the life my family understood or valued. It is entirely and completely mine. There are evenings, quiet Tuesdays usually, when the dining room is half full and the kitchen is running smoothly and the light is doing that particular thing it does in a well-designed room, when I stand at the host station and look out at the tables and feel something I can only describe as rightness. Like, this is what I built. This is what I chose. This is what nobody's dinner bill could ever cost me. That feeling is not nothing. That feeling is everything. I want to say something to anyone who has ever been the person everyone calls when there is something to pay for. You are not a bank. You are not a resource. You are a person. And the fact that you have been generous does not obligate you to continue being generous when generosity is being mistaken for obligation. There is a version of this story where I walk into Meridian and I pay the bill. I've thought about that version. In that version, I am sitting in my car afterward with $4,000 gone and a dinner I didn't order and a family who learned once again that there is no limit to what Cassie will absorb. In that version, the dinner is not the last of its kind. It is a confirmation that the pattern works, that the pattern can continue. I paid for sparkling water, $14.50. And by doing exactly that, by paying for what I ordered and nothing else I said more clearly than any argument could have, I know what this is. I will not participate in it. You are going to have to figure this out yourselves. Saying no to the people you love is not a betrayal. It is sometimes the most honest thing you can do. It tells the truth about what you are and are not available to be. It gives the relationship the only real chance it has, because a relationship built on one person absorbing the cost of another person's choices is not a relationship. It is an arrangement, and arrangements do not love you back. Know what you ordered. Pay for that. Leave the table when you need to. You are allowed to do that. You always were. If this story sat with you the way it sat with me, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, have you ever been put in a position where someone expected you to pay for something you never agreed to? What did you do?